The rooftop of the Meridian Tower had never looked more beautiful or more expensive, and every single dollar of it was mine. I stood in the elevator as the doors slid open onto the 42nd floor, and the first thing I heard was applause. Not for me. The crowd of 200 people in tailored blazers and silk cocktail dresses was facing the other direction, toward the glass podium at the center of the rooftop terrace, where my husband was holding a crystal champagne flute above his head, like he had personally invented the concept of success. Derek looked exactly the way he always looked when he wanted something from a room full of people. Joe sat, shoulders back. That slow, deliberate smile that made investors reach for their checkbooks before he even finished his sentence. He was wearing the charcoal Brioni suit I had picked out for him 2 Christmases ago, and the watch I had given him on our 4th anniversary, and the confidence that came from spending $750,000 of my inheritance on a startup he now pretended I had nothing to do with. I smoothed the front of my blazer and stepped onto the terrace. He saw me before I made it 3 steps past the elevator bank. The smile did not disappear immediately. It flickered. His eyes dropped to the leather portfolio tucked under my arm, then moved to the woman standing directly to my right. A sharp-featured attorney named Sandra, who had spent the last 11 years making the kinds of men who forgot to read their own contracts deeply regret that oversight. Then Derek's gaze moved to my left. And that is when the smile finally died. The 2 men standing on my left were not security guards. They were federal marshals. I kept walking. The applause had softened into confused murmuring. A few of the tech journalists near the bar lowered their glasses. The seed investors Derek had been courting for months exchanged glances across the cocktail tables. Somewhere behind me, I heard the sharp click of a smartphone camera. And then another. And then several more in rapid succession. Because there were at least 30 influencers at this launch party who had been live streaming the entire event. And nothing ends a live stream faster than 2 federal marshals walking into a rooftop celebration in downtown Austin. Derek handed his champagne flute to someone nearby without looking at them and stepped down from the glass podium. His business partner, my brother-in-law Ryan, materialized at his side almost immediately, leaning in close, whispering something with the panicked efficiency of a man who had spent years cleaning up after his brother. Derek brushed him off with one hand and cut straight across the terrace toward me, his expression shifting from surprise into something harder and colder that I recognized very well. "What are you doing here?" he said. It was not a question. His voice was low, controlled, designed to sound like a man dealing patiently with an embarrassing situation rather than a man whose chest was caving in with terror. He stepped close enough that I could smell the champagne on his breath, close enough that he could lower his voice further and make this feel like a private conversation. "This is a private event. You were not invited." I looked at him for a long moment. I had rehearsed a dozen different things to say. Wittu. Cutting. Devastating. But standing there with the Austin skyline glittering behind him, and 200 people watching and my attorney at my shoulder, I found I did not need any of them. "I am not here for the party," I said. "I am here for my intellectual property." Derek's jaw tightened. He glanced at Sandra, then at the marshals. He let out a short sharp laugh that was designed to sound dismissive, but landed closer to a man who has just been informed that the building he is standing in is on fire. "Your intellectual property," he repeated. "You signed a full IP assignment agreement 18 months ago. Everything you contributed transferred to the company. You have no claim here." His voice had risen slightly, not enough for the crowd to hear clearly, but enough that the journalists nearest to us were leaning forward with the focused attention of people who are very good at reading a room. Sandra stepped up beside me and opened the leather portfolio. She did not raise her voice. She never needed to. Mr. Calloway, she said, using his last name with the particular precision of an attorney who has already won. Your wife did sign an IP assignment agreement 18 months ago. She also signed a co-inventor declaration on U.S. patent. Application number 184478831. Filed 22 months ago for the core predictive routing algorithm that your platform is built on. That declaration was never superseded. The assignment agreement your team prepared contained a material drafting error that excluded the primary patent from its scope. Your legal team missed it. Our forensic IP review did not. She pulled a document from the portfolio and held it out toward him. He did not take it. The platform you are launching tonight, Sandra continued. The one you just told 200 people is the most sophisticated logistics optimization tool in the southern United States. Cannot legally operate without a license to use that algorithm. You do not have that license. Because the patent belongs to your wife. The silence that followed was the specific kind that only happens when a very large room full of very intelligent people simultaneously realizes they are witnessing something that is going to be discussed for a very long time. Derek's composure cracked in a way I had only seen once before. The night I had accidentally walked into his home office and found a text thread on his unlocked laptop that explained, in excruciating detail, exactly why Vanessa from the product design team had been working so many late evenings. He recovered quickly back then. He was not recovering quickly now. This is fraud, he said. His voice had dropped to something close to a hiss. You are standing in front of my investors at my launch event, making fraudulent claims about intellectual property that you forked over voluntarily. I will have you removed. He turned and looked directly at the two marshals. Gentlemen, this woman is my estranged wife. She is disrupting a private corporate event. I need her escorted out immediately. The lead marshal, a calm, broad-shouldered man, who looked like he had heard much more creative arguments than this one, reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. He held it out toward Derek. Sir, we are not here to escort anyone out. We are here to execute a civil seizure order issued this morning by the Western District of Texas. Pursuant to the temporary restraining order granted at 9:45 a.m. today, the commercial demonstration and promotion of any product built on the disputed patent is enjoined pending resolution of the underlying IP ownership claim. He unfolded the document fully and held it up. The launch presentation is halted. The product demonstration is halted. Anyone who continues to commercially represent this platform tonight risks contempt. The ripple that went through the crowd was audible. Derek grabbed the document out of the marshal's hand and stared at it. I watched his eyes move across the page. I watched the exact moment he reached the judge's signature and understood that this was not a bluff. His knuckles went white at the edges of the paper. Ryan appeared at his elbow again. His face, the color of old chalk. He had his own phone in his hand. And I could tell from the way he was holding it that he had already been texting the company's legal counsel, and the legal counsel had already confirmed what Sandra had just told 200 people in cocktail attire on a rooftop in Austin. The three lead investors Derek had been grooming for 6 months were standing near the railing at the far end of the terrace. I could see them. 2 of them already had their coats. The third was on her phone. And from the deliberate way, she had turned her back to the crowd. She was not calling for a car. She was calling her own attorney. Derek looked up from the document and found me again. The mask had come completely off. What was underneath it was not grief or remorse. It was the specific fury of a man who has built an elaborate architecture of deception and watched someone quietly remove the foundation while he was busy admiring the roof. "You planned this," he said. "You waited for tonight deliberately. You could have brought this to me privately. You could have come to me with this, and we could have resolved it quietly. You chose to do this here because you wanted to humiliate me." I let him finish. "I came to you privately 8 months ago," I said. "When I found out you had filed the company restructuring documents that removed my name from the founding team. When I found out you had reassigned my equity stake to a new share class that carried no voting rights and no liquidation preference. When I sent you a certified letter through my attorney asking to discuss the IP ownership question, and you had your counsel respond that my contributions were quota administrative in nature and not inventive. I came to you privately 8 months ago. And you told me, through 3 layers of legal representation, that I had no standing and no claim, and that if I pursued this, I would be spending money I did not have on a fight I could not win. I took 1 step closer to him. I had standing. I had a claim. And I had a very good attorney. One of the journalists, a woman with a press badge from a major tech publication, had stopped pretending not to listen and was now openly recording on her phone. 2 of the influencers had drifted closer, their cameras raised. The live stream views were climbing. I could see the numbers on one of the screens as I passed. Derek's business partner Vanessa, who had been hovering near the product demonstration table on the eastern side of the terrace, finally crossed the room toward us. She had been Derek's head of product for 2 years. She had also, based on the contents of the unlocked laptop and the 4 months of subsequent investigation my attorney had conducted, been considerably more than that. She was wearing a deep green dress that had not been purchased on a product manager's salary, and the diamond stud earrings catching the terrace lights were a style I recognized from the Tiffany receipt I had found in the inside pocket of Derek's travel bag last spring. Vanessa placed herself just behind Derek's right shoulder with the practiced positioning of someone who had rehearsed where to stand. Her expression was arranged into something meant to project calm authority. "Claire," she said, using my first name with a familiarity I found remarkable given the circumstances. "I understand you are upset. But this is not the way to handle a business dispute. You are hurting people who had nothing to do with your marriage." I looked at her for exactly as long as it took me to decide she had said exactly the wrong thing. "You have been listed as a secondary beneficiary on the performance equity pool that Derek restructured, specifically to absorb the share value he stripped from my founding stake," I said. "I know that because our forensic accountant spent 6 weeks reconstructing the cap table. You are not a bystander in this. You are a named party in the civil filing." The color left Vanessa's face so completely and so quickly that several people standing nearby visibly reacted. Derek spun toward her. "What?" he said. She shook her head. "I do not know what she is talking about." "She is talking about the amended equity schedule your CFO filed in February," Sandra said, producing a second document from the portfolio. The one that reallocated Claire's stripped shares into a new instrument class with Vanessa Chen, listed as co-beneficiary, alongside 3 other employees. It was buried in the quarterly restructuring filing. We found it anyway. Derek stared at Vanessa. Something shifted between them in the open air of that terrace that had nothing to do with me anymore. His jaw worked. His eyes moved across her face, looking for something. Reassurance. Explanation. Anything. And found nothing useful. The lead investor, who had not yet put her coat on, walked directly up to Derek, cutting through the frozen tableau with the no-nonsense energy of someone who has not survived 30 years in venture capital by avoiding difficult moments. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and the kind of measured calm that costs a great deal of experience to develop. "Derek," she said, "I am going to need you to call my office Monday morning." She glanced at the document in his hand, then at Sandra, then at the federal marshals. And I am going to need your legal team to provide full documentation on this patent question before we have that conversation. She picked up her clutch from a nearby table and looked at me briefly with an expression that was not sympathy exactly, but was something close to recognition. Then she walked to the elevator, nodded to her colleagues, and all three of them stepped inside. Derek watched the elevator doors close. He stood very still for a moment with his back to the room, facing the brushed steel doors. And I could see the effort it was costing him to keep his breathing controlled. Ryan had stopped texting. He was just standing there looking at his brother with an expression that mixed loyalty and dread in proportions I almost felt sorry for. When Derek turned back around, he was attempting the voice of a reasonable man who has simply encountered an unfortunate misunderstanding. "We can fix this," he said to me. "We can sit down with both legal teams tomorrow morning and work out a licensing structure. This does not have to be a war. You will get a fair valuation for the IP. We will compensate you appropriately, and you can move on with your life." He spread his hands open, a gesture I had once found charming and now recognized as the physical equivalent of a terms and conditions agreement written in 6-point font. He was offering me a settlement in front of 200 witnesses, not because he had reconsidered my worth, but because he needed the marshals off his terrace and the investors back on his phone before the story finished rendering on the backs by Werfend. Live streams. I looked at his open hands. I thought about the IP assignment agreement his attorney had presented me with 14 months ago. Buried in a stack of restructuring documents, he had handed me at our kitchen table on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. Telling me it was routine. Telling me it was just standard paperwork. Telling me the company would not exist without me, and this was just how these things were formalized. I had taken the stack and told him I wanted to read everything first. I had read everything first. I had spotted the drafting error his own attorney had missed. The narrow exclusion language that left the core patent outside the transfer scope. And I had said nothing. And I had signed the other documents. And I had filed that information away in the same careful mental folder where I had stored everything else I was going to need eventually. I reached into my portfolio and handed him the final document myself. I did not need Sandra to do it. I had been waiting for this specific moment for 8 months. The platform launches when the court says it launches. I said, "The patent is mine. The injunction is in place. And Derek." I smiled. "I already have a licensing structure in mind. You will be hearing from my attorney Monday morning." He took the document. He looked down at it. He looked up at me. And for the first time in 4 years of marriage, my husband had nothing at all to say. The guests did not leave all at once, the way water drains from a tub. They left in clusters, in 2s and 3s, and then in larger groups. The journalists first because they had stories to file. Then the investors because they had calls to make. Then the influencers, because their audiences were demanding commentary, and they had learned the hard way that being associated with a legal catastrophe does nothing good for a brand deal pipeline. The catering staff began collecting untouched appetizer plates. The DJ had stopped playing sometime during the second document presentation and had not started again. By the time the marshals completed their formal paperwork with Sandra and prepared to leave, the rooftop had gone from a 200-person product launch to a mostly empty terrace with a lot of half-full champagne flutes and a few confused guests who had not entirely followed the legal proceedings but understood clearly that the party was over. Ryan sat down heavily in a chair near the railing and put his face in his hands. He had not said a single word for the last 40 minutes. I understood his position. He had invested his own savings into Derek's company. He had spent 2 years building out the sales infrastructure. He was not a bad person. He was a man who had followed his brother into a room and was only now fully understanding what the room contained. Derek was standing near the glass podium, still holding the injunction, reading it for what appeared to be the third time. As though the words might change, Vanessa was no longer on the terrace. I was not sure exactly when she had left, but I noticed her absence around the time the last investors reached the elevator. My phone buzzed. I looked at it. It was a text from a number I did not recognize. And then I looked more carefully and realized it was Vanessa's number, which I had because Derek had once asked me to text her directly about a product timeline. The message said, "Only I am sorry." He told me the shares were vested compensation for my work. I did not know about you or the patent or any of it. I thought he owned everything free and clear. I read it twice. I put the phone back in my pocket. I did not respond. I had neither the inclination nor the legal advisability of responding to a named party in an active civil matter via text message. But I noted the message because it told me something I had not known for certain until that moment, which was that Vanessa had been lied to just as comprehensively as I had, only in a different direction. My mother-in-law had been standing near the back of the crowd for most of the confrontation. A tall, rigid woman in a silver dress who managed to project profound disapproval in every direction simultaneously. Margaret Calloway had disliked me from the afternoon Derek first brought me to their house in Westlake Hills. And her reasons had never been subtle. She had wanted her son to marry someone from a family she recognized, someone whose money had existed long enough to have its own history. My inheritance from my grandmother had arrived as a lump sum 3 years ago, which in her estimation made it nouveau, and therefore slightly suspect. Regardless of the fact that her son had spent every dollar of it on a startup and a lifestyle, she was very happy to enjoy at holiday dinners. She crossed the terrace toward me now, with the particular determination of a woman who has decided that the correct response to a legal catastrophe is a strongly worded maternal intervention. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" she said. "Not a question. A verdict. I have protected my intellectual property." I said. "You have humiliated this family in public." She said. "You have destroyed your husband's business on the biggest night of his career." "And for what?" She lowered her voice into something she clearly intended to be withering. "You were never going to be in this company, Claire. You were never built for this world. Derek created something extraordinary. And you are trying to drag him down, because you cannot stand watching him succeed without you." I looked at her for a moment. I had spent years trying to understand what it cost her to say things like that. Whether she believed them, whether she understood what they revealed about her. "Margaret," I said, "your son built his platform on a patent that belongs to me. Using $750,000. I contributed as a founding investment. After removing my name from the company records and restructuring my equity into a worthless share class. I was in this company from the first line of code. I was sitting at that kitchen table with him at 2 a.m. working out the routing algorithm that became the core of everything he demonstrated tonight. I did not drag him down. He built on a foundation he did not own and did not pay for. And I am here to collect what is mine." She opened her mouth. "Also," I added, "your son forged my signature on the secondary IP assignment he filed with the USPTO 6 months ago, the one he thought would close the gap in the original agreement. Our handwriting analyst confirmed it last week. That is a federal offense. I have not yet decided whether to refer it for criminal prosecution. But I wanted you to know that I know, so that when you call him tonight, you can ask him about it." Margaret Calloway's mouth closed. Something moved across her face that was not quite shame and not quite fear, but lived in the territory between them. She picked up her evening bag from the table beside her and walked to the elevator without another word. Derek had heard the last part. I could tell by the way his shoulders had changed. He turned around slowly and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Something stripped of strategy and performance. Just a man standing in the wreckage of a plan that had seemed so complete and so untouchable until the moment it was not. "You knew about the signature," he said. "For 3 weeks?" I said. He sat down on the edge of the glass podium. He pressed his hands flat against his thighs. He looked at the injunction document still in his hand and then set it down carefully on the podium beside him. "The way you set something down, when you no longer have the energy to hold it. The federal signature issue," Sandra said, appearing at my shoulder with her portfolio closed and her expression professionally neutral, "is something we can discuss in detail through proper channels. For tonight, the injunction is in place, and the marshals have completed their role. We should go." I looked at Derek one more time. The charcoal suit, the anniversary watch, the hollowed-out expression of a man who had spent 4 years convincing himself that ambition and intelligence were sufficient replacements for integrity, and had just received the invoice for that belief. I did not feel triumph exactly. I felt the particular cold clarity of someone who has spent 8 months preparing for a moment that finally arrived exactly as planned. "Good night, Derek," I said. I walked to the elevator. I did not look back. 5 months later, I sat in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a federal courthouse in Austin, while a mediator walked my estranged husband through the terms of a settlement agreement. He had no realistic leverage to refuse. His attorney, a competent but visibly exhausted man who had clearly spent the past several months running damage control on multiple fronts simultaneously. Read through the document with the careful attention of someone searching for any remaining option that did not exist. Derek had filed for Chapter 11 restructuring on the company 8 weeks after the launch party. The injunction had stopped the product release cold, and without a demonstrable platform to show investors, the remaining funding conversations had dissolved. The company had approximately $400,000 in operating liabilities, 2 employees, and a core technology it could not legally use. Sandra had explained to me, with the patient precision she brought to everything, that the fraudulent signature on the USPTO filing created a separate liability exposure for Derek that made any aggressive litigation posture on his part financially suicidal. He was not in a position to fight. The settlement terms were straightforward. Full ownership of the patent returned to me, uncontested. Repayment of my founding investment structured as a 10-year personal liability. Since the company assets were insufficient to cover it, a royalty arrangement giving any future iteration of his platform the right to license the algorithm at a rate our forensic economist had benchmarked at market value, which was not a small number, and a formal acknowledgement, entered into the court record, that my contributions to the company had been inventive in nature, which was the specific phrase his attorney had used 8 months ago to deny me, and which I had asked to have included in the settlement document for the specific satisfaction of watching Derek's attorney read it aloud and sign beneath it. Derek signed everything without looking up from the table. I noticed he was no longer wearing the anniversary watch. Ryan, sitting against the wall with his own attorney, looked older than he had at the launch party. He was not a party to the settlement, but he had asked to be present. I respected that. He had also, I learned through Sandra 2 months earlier, been the one who provided a voluntary statement to the mediator confirming the details of the equity restructuring, corroborating my forensic accountant's reconstruction of the cap table. He had not been required to do that. He had done it anyway. I did not have room in my life to be generous to everyone who had been complicit in what Derek had built. But I noted what Ryan had done, and I set it in a separate category from the rest. The fraudulent USPTO signature was referred to the Department of Justice the following week. I did not make that decision lightly. I made it because my attorney told me that, not referring it, created a precedent problem in my own filing. And because the part of me that had worked 60-hour weeks building an algorithm that someone else tried to steal, decided it was not her job to protect a person who had committed a federal crime from its federal consequences. A year and a half after I stood in an elevator watching the doors open onto a rooftop I had inadvertently paid for, I walked through the front entrance of my own office in the South Congress building in Austin on a Tuesday morning in October. It was not a big space. 4 offices. A shared common area. A whiteboard that had been covered in marker every single day since we moved in. We had 7 full-time employees and 2 contractors. And 3 months prior, we had signed a licensing agreement with a regional freight network that put us into profitability for the first time. The platform we were building used the same core algorithm at its center. The one that had been the subject of a federal injunction on a rooftop in downtown Austin. The one that was mine and had always been mine. We were building something different with it. Not a consumer-facing product designed to look impressive at launch parties. An infrastructure tool for mid-size logistics operators who needed routing optimization they could actually afford and actually maintain. Unglamorous. Essential. Profitable. My head of engineering. A former colleague who had reached out to me 2 weeks after the Meridian Tower story circulated through the Austin tech community, handed me the weekly metrics summary as I came through the door. The numbers on the top line made me stop walking for a moment. "Pretty good week," she said. "Pretty good week." I agreed. I poured coffee and sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The first notification in my email was the automated confirmation of a wire transfer, the monthly payment from the Callaway licensing agreement. Because for all the restructuring and the bankruptcy filing and the settlement negotiations, the platform had eventually launched 6 months after the injunction was lifted. Under a new company name with new investors. And every month on the 22nd, a percentage of their revenue cleared into my account as royalty income. A quiet and permanent reminder that the algorithm in their foundation belonged to someone they had tried very hard to make invisible. I thought sometimes about the woman I had been 4 years ago. Sitting at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with a laptop and a legal pad, and a husband who was very convincing about the future he was building and the place I had in it. I did not think about her with pity. She had known what she was building. She had read everything she was asked to sign. She had noticed the error in the assignment agreement and understood what it meant and kept it. She had been patient and precise, and she had not confused the warmth of a relationship with the terms of a contract. There is a version of this story where I signed that assignment agreement without reading it. Where I trusted that the man who came home to me every night would not structure a transaction designed to erase me from something I built. I have thought about that version of the story a great deal. And what I always come back to is this: the love was real. And the documents were also real. And a person can love you genuinely and still write a contract that protects only themselves. Because love and legal literacy are 2 completely different languages. And knowing the second one does not mean you have less of the first. Read everything. Keep copies of everything. Understand what you are signing and what you are not signing. And if someone tells you it is just routine paperwork, sit down and read it anyway. Because routine paperwork is exactly where the consequential sentences live. You do not have to be suspicious to be prepared. You do not have to stop trusting people to also trust yourself. If this story reached you at a moment when you needed to hear it, please share it with someone who is building something and deserves to know that what they build belongs to them. Subscribe for more stories about rebuilding, reclaiming, and refusing to be written out of your own work.